The noon sun beat down on Dust Creek's main street like a hammer on an anvil, baking the red dirt until it cracked like old leather. The air hung thick with dust and the stench of sweat, horses, and something worse, the smell of cruelty that comes when a crowd gathers to watch someone suffer. Clara Jennings stood tied to the back of a freight wagon in the center of town, her wrists bound tight with rough rope that cut into her skin. Her dark hair, once pinned neat, now hung loose around her face, catching the desert wind. She kept her chin up, though her legs trembled from standing in the same position for near an hour. The torn sleeve of her calico dress exposed a bruised shoulder, but she didn't try to hide it. Let them see what they'd done. Around her, the good citizens of Dust Creek formed a half circle, some watching with crossed arms and satisfied sneers, others shifting uncomfortable-like but too cowardly to speak up. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts, learning early what happened to those who crossed the wrong people in this town. "Look at her, boys!" Jasper Crowley's voice boomed across the square. He sat high on his black stallion, a man built like a bull with hands that had never known honest work. His fine coat and silver-studded gun belt marked him as what he was, a man who took what he wanted and called it business. This here's what happens when someone thinks they can hold out on Jasper Crowley. The crowd murmured approval, though Clara noticed how few met her eyes. Cowards, all of them. They knew the truth well enough. Her small ranch sat on the sweetest water for 50 miles, and Crowley wanted it. When she wouldn't sell, he'd found other ways. First came the cut fences, then the poisoned well, then the burned barn. When she still held on, he'd accused her of stealing cattle, his own cattle, that his men had driven onto her land in the dead of night. The sheriff, bought and paid for, had done the rest. "Thief!" someone shouted from the crowd. Others took up the cry, "Cattle thief rustler!" Clara's green eyes swept over them, hard as flint. She recognized most faces: Baker Thompson, who she'd nursed through fever last winter; Mary Sullivan, whose baby she'd helped deliver; old Pete Carson, who'd eaten at her table more times than she could count. Now they stood there, letting this happen. Some even seemed to enjoy it. 3 hours, Crowley announced, checking his gold pocket watch with theatrical flair. That's what Judge Morrison sentenced. 3 hours of public humiliation for the crime of cattle theft. His smile was cold as a snake's. Course, we all know there's a simple way to end this early. Miss Jennings, sign over that deed, and I'll cut you loose myself. Clara spat in the dirt. Her voice came out hoarse but steady. "I'd rather stand here till Judgment Day than give you 1 square inch of my land." Crowley. His face darkened, and he spurred his horse closer. The animal's hot breath hit her face as Crowley leaned down. "You got spirit, woman. Too bad it ain't worth spit out here." He straightened up, addressing the crowd again. "Let this be a lesson in Dust Creek. We respect property rights and the law." Some men laughed at that. They all knew whose property rights got respected and whose didn't. The sun climbed higher, and Clara's world narrowed to the burn of rope on her wrists and the weight of all those eyes. Sweat ran down her back, soaking through her dress. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed sand, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of asking for water. The crowd grew as word spread. Shopkeepers abandoned their stores. Miners came in from the diggings. Saloon girls leaned out of upstairs windows. It was better than a hanging. Some figured a woman's humiliation always drew viewers like flies to honey. That's when Clara noticed him. He came down the street from the direction of the livery stable, moving with the unhurried pace of a man with nowhere special to be, tall and lean, wearing clothes that had seen better days, canvas pants, worn boots, a shirt that might have been white once but had faded to the color of old bones. No fancy gun rig, just an old Colt worn high on his hip. His hat shadowed his face, but she could see he was clean-shaven, unusual for these parts. The crowd parted for him without seeming to realize they were doing it. Something about the way he moved. Maybe not aggressive, not looking for trouble, but not stepping aside for it either. like a river rock that water flows around. He stopped at the edge of the circle, taking in the scene with eyes the color of winter sky. His gaze moved from Crowley on his high horse to the men with rifles standing guard, to Clara tied to the wagon. When their eyes met, she saw something she hadn't expected, not pity, which she would have hated, but a kind of quiet reckoning, like a man counting the cost of fence posts or calculating the distance to water. "Well, well," Crowley called out, noticing the newcomer. "If it ain't Samuel Wade, come to town for supplies. Wade, or just here to enjoy the show?" Wade didn't answer right away. He studied the scene a moment longer, then said in a voice soft as distant thunder, "Seems like a lot of fuss for one woman. Crowley." "Justice ain't fuss," Crowley shot back. "This woman's a thief, convicted fair and square. You got a problem with the law now?" "No problem with the law," Wade said, and started walking forward. The crowd tensed. The guards shifted their rifles, but Wade moved steady and calm, like a man walking through his own barn. He stopped right in front of Clara, close enough she could smell leather and trail dust and something else, the clean scent of open country. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim. "Sir," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. He walked around to the back of the wagon, examining the ropes. The crowd had gone dead quiet now, everyone waiting to see what this fool rancher planned to do. Crowley's hand moved to his gun. "Wade," he warned, "you best step back. This is legal punishment, ordered by Judge Morrison himself." Wade reached into his pocket, and several men went for their weapons. But all he pulled out was a folding knife, the kind any rancher carried for cutting rope and such. He opened it slow and deliberate. "Legal," he said, like he was tasting the word. "Lots of things are legal that ain't right. You interfering with justice? Wade." Crowley's voice had gone dangerous. "That's a serious offense." Wade looked up at him then, and something in his eyes made Crowley's horse take a nervous step back. "Her time's about up anyway, by my count. Figure I'm just helping things along." "She's got another hour at least." "No," Wade said simply, and cut the first rope. The sound of parting fibers seemed loud as a gunshot. Clara felt the pressure on her left wrist ease, and she bit back a sob of relief. Wade moved to the other rope, steady as if he was mending fence, not defying the most powerful man in 3 counties. "Stop him!" Crowley roared. But something strange happened. Nobody moved. The guards looked at each other uncertain-like. The crowd seemed frozen, watching this quiet rancher do what none of them had the courage to do. The second rope parted. Clara's legs gave out, but Wade caught her elbow, held her steady till she found her feet. He didn't make a show of it, didn't sweep her up like some dime novel hero, just offered his arm like they were leaving church on Sunday. "Can you walk, ma'am?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "My horse is at the livery. We'll go slow." They started moving through the crowd, and still nobody tried to stop them. Maybe it was the way Wade moved, not rushing, not running, just walking like he had every right. Maybe it was the shock of seeing someone, anyone, stand up to Jasper Crowley. Or maybe, Clara thought, some of them were glad to see it, even if they'd never say so. "Wade!" Crowley's bellow followed them. "You just made the biggest mistake of your worthless life, you hear me? I'll see you hang for this." Wade paused, looked back over his shoulder. When he spoke, his voice carried clear across the square. "Man's gotta do what's right, Crowley. Thought you'd have learned that by now." Then he continued walking, Clara beside him, through the parting crowd and down the dusty street, leaving Jasper Crowley sitting on his fancy horse with his face the color of fresh beef and murder in his eyes. The sun kept beating down. The dust kept swirling, but something had shifted in the air of Dust Creek. A woman had been cut free. A quiet man had acted. And somewhere in that watching crowd, a few people started to remember what courage looked like. It was a small thing, maybe, but in a hard land where small things could grow into legends, It was enough to start something that wouldn't end with just a cut rope and a walk down a dusty street. Samuel Wade's sorrel mare stood patient in the livery stable, saddled and ready like she knew they'd be leaving in a hurry. Wade helped Clara up first, then swung up behind her, settling her against his chest when she swayed. She wanted to protest, to say she could ride her own horse, but the truth was she could barely keep upright. The ordeal in the square had taken more out of her than she'd let on. "Easy now," Wade murmured, gathering the reins. His voice rumbled through his chest where her back pressed against him. "We'll take it slow." They rode out of Dust Creek at a walk, though Clara could feel the tension in Wade's body, ready to spur the mare to a gallop if needed. Behind them, she could hear Crowley still shouting, organizing his men, but Wade didn't hurry. He kept that same steady pace, like a man who'd learned that panic never solved anything. The town fell away behind them, giving way to scrub brush and red rock. The road wound through a narrow canyon, then opened up to the vast expanse of prairie that stretched toward the mountains. Only then did Wade let the mare pick up her pace, settling into an easy lope that ate up the miles. Clara had never been this close to a man who wasn't kin. She could smell the sun-warmed cotton of his shirt, feel the solid strength of his arm around her waist, keeping her secure in the saddle. It should have frightened her. Maybe, after what she'd been through. Instead, she felt safer than she had in months. "Where are we going?" she finally asked when they slowed to cross a shallow creek. "My place," Wade said. "It's not much, but it's quiet. You can rest up, figure out what you want to do next." "Why?" The question came out before she could stop it. "You don't know me. You just made an enemy of the most powerful man in the county for a stranger." Wade was quiet for a long moment, guiding the mare up the far bank. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My PA used to say that a man shows his true measure not by how he treats his equals, but by what he does when he sees someone who can't fight back being wronged. Reckon I couldn't ride by today and still call myself his son." They rode on in silence after that, following a trail that was barely more than a deer path through the sage. The sun was starting to sink toward the mountains when Wade finally turned the mare toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a grove of cottonwoods. It wasn't much, as he'd said. A small cabin of hand-hewn logs, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, a corral with a few horses, and a well with a wooden shelter over it. But the place was neat, the fences mended, and there were flowers growing in a little garden patch, marigolds and zinnias that someone had taken the trouble to water in this dry land. "My sister planted those before she married and moved to California," Wade said, noticing her gaze. "I keep them going for her." He dismounted first, then reached up to help Clara down. Her legs buckled when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her, held her steady until the world stopped spinning. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. She had to think about it. "Yesterday, maybe, or the day before." His jaw tightened, but he just nodded. "Come on, let's get you inside." The cabin was one room, but clean and organized. A bed in one corner with a colorful quilt, a table and 2 chairs, a cook stove, shelves lined with books that surprised her. Not many ranchers out here bothered with books. Wade settled her in one of the chairs and went to work at the stove, efficient as any woman. Soon the smell of coffee filled the small space, followed by bacon and the sizzle of eggs. He set a plate in front of her without ceremony. "Eat slow," he advised. "Your stomach's been empty too long." She wanted to fall on the food like a wolf, but she took his advice, eating small bites while he tended to his horse and washed up at the basin. When he sat down across from her with his own plate, she was feeling almost human again. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded, focusing on his food. They ate in companionable silence while the light faded outside the windows. Finally, Wade pushed back his plate and really looked at her for the first time since they'd arrived. "You want to tell me what really happened?" So she told him about her husband dying 2 years back, leaving her with a small ranch, about trying to make a go of it alone, fighting drought and loneliness and the peculiar cruelty reserved for women who didn't have a man's protection. About Crowley's offers to buy her out, each one lower than the last, and what happened when she kept refusing. Wade listened without interrupting, his face giving away little. When she finished, he got up and poured more coffee for both of them. "You got anywhere else to go?" he asked. "Family back east, maybe." She shook her head. "That ranch is all I have." "Was all I had." She stared into her coffee cup. "Crowley will have it now. Can't fight him without money for lawyers, and can't work the place if his men keep burning me out." "Maybe," Wade said. "Maybe not." She looked up at him, confused. "You're welcome to stay here long as you need." He continued, "I've got that old tack room in the barn. I can fix it up proper. Make it private for you. You can work for your keep if you've a mind to. I can always use help around the place. And I pay fair wages." "You don't understand," Clara said. "Crowley won't let this go. You helped me, embarrassed him in front of the whole town. He'll come after you too now." Wade's smile was thin but genuine. "Ma'am, Jasper Crowley's been trying to run me off my land for 3 years now. Difference is, I don't scare easy. And I've got friends among the other small ranchers. We look out for each other. Crowley knows if he pushes me too hard, he'll have a range war on his hands. And you'd risk that for me, a stranger?" "You're not a stranger now." Wade said simply, "You're someone who needs help. That makes it my business." He stood up, started clearing the dishes. "Besides, I've been looking for an excuse to stand up to Crowley proper. Reckon you gave me one." Clara felt tears prick her eyes for the first time all day. She'd been strong through the humiliation, the pain, the fear, but this simple kindness from a quiet man nearly undid her. "I'll work," she said fiercely. "I'm not Charity. I can cook, keep house, help with the horses." "I know," Wade said. "Wouldn't have offered otherwise." He showed her to the barn, where the tack room was indeed small but clean, with a narrow cot and a chest of drawers. He brought blankets and a pillow from the house, hung a lantern from a hook. "There's a bar for the door on the inside," he said. "You'll be safe here. I'll be in the house if you need anything." She sat on the cot, testing it. "Mr. Wade." "Samuel," he corrected. "Or Sam, if you prefer." "Samuel?" She looked up at him standing in the doorway, this man who'd walked through a hostile crowd for her. "Why aren't you married, a man with his own place? Steady ways seems like women would be lining up." He was quiet for a moment, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Never found one who could see past the quiet. "I reckon. Most women want a man who talks pretty, makes promises. I'm not much for words." "Words are cheap," Clara said. "Actions matter more." He touched his hat brim, that same gesture from town. "Get some rest, Miss Clara. Tomorrow we'll see about getting you proper settled." After he left, Clara barred the door and sat in the gathering darkness. For the first time in months, she felt something besides fear and anger. It might have been hope, or maybe just the simple relief of being safe, even temporarily. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of a working ranch horse's nickering, chickens settling for the night, the creak of the windmill. From the house came the soft glow of lamplight and the faint sound of Samuel moving around, probably reading one of those books. She'd lost her ranch today, been humiliated in front of the whole town, but somehow, sitting in this clean little room on a stranger's property, she felt like she might have gained something too. What exactly? She couldn't say yet, but for the first time in a long while, tomorrow didn't seem quite so dark. The moon rose full over the cottonwoods, and Clara Jennings finally let herself rest. The bar solid across the door and the quiet presence of Samuel Wade standing watch between her and whatever troubles would surely come with the dawn. The rooster's crow pulled Clara from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was the unfamiliar walls, the smell of hay and leather instead of smoke and fear. Then it came back, Samuel Wade's barn. Safety. a barred door between her and the world. She dressed quickly in her torn dress, wishing she had something else to wear but grateful for what she had. When she stepped outside, the morning air was crisp and clean. Carrying the scent of coffee from the house, Wade was already at work in the corral, running a brush over a bay stallion's coat with long, steady strokes. "Morning," he called without turning around. "Coffee's on the stove. Biscuits in the warming box. Help yourself." She wanted to go straight to work, to start earning her keep, but the smell of food made her stomach clench with hunger. She ate standing at the counter, watching through the window as Wade worked. He had an easy way with the horses, firm but gentle, and they stood quiet under his hands. When she joined him outside, he handed her a curry comb without comment. "This here's Zeus. He's particular about strangers, but if you move slow and talk soft, he'll come around." They worked side by side in companionable silence, Clara finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of ranch chores. The sun climbed higher, warming her back through the thin fabric of her dress. When Zeus finally stopped eyeing her sideways and let her brush his neck, she felt a small victory. "You're good with horses?" Wade observed. "Had to be. My husband." She paused, then continued. "Tom was better with cattle than horses. Someone had to gentle the riding stock." Wade nodded, understanding in that simple gesture that she'd been doing a man's work long before she was widowed. They moved on to the other horses, then to mucking stalls, then to checking the fence line around the nearest pasture. He didn't treat her like she was fragile or incapable, just pointed out what needed doing and let her do it. By noon, Clara was sweat-soaked and aching, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from honest work, not from being tied to a wagon in the town square. They ate lunch under the cottonwoods, cold biscuits and jerky washed down with water from the well. "I need to go to town for supplies tomorrow," Wade said. "You're welcome to come, but no." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I mean, thank you, but I'm not ready to face them yet." "Fair enough. Write down anything you need. Clothing, personal items." When she started to protest about the cost, he held up a hand. "You've earned it already with the work you've done today. I'd have paid a hand the same." That afternoon, he showed her the vegetable garden his sister had started. It was struggling in the dry heat, but the plants were still alive. Clara knelt in the dirt, checking the soil, testing the leaves for pests. "I can save this," she said, half to herself. "Needs more water, some straw for mulch, maybe some chicken manure worked in." When she looked up, Wade was watching her with an odd expression. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just, it's good to see someone care about it again. I've kept it alive, but barely. Never had much hand for growing things." They spent the rest of the day working on the garden, Clara directing and Wade hauling water and spreading straw. As the sun started to sink, she stood back and surveyed their work with satisfaction. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That evening, she cooked supper, proper supper, not just bacon and eggs. She found flour and lard, some preserved tomatoes, dried beans she set to soaking, while Wade tended to evening chores. She made biscuits and a simple stew with the last of the fresh meat. Wade's expression when he came in and smelled the food was worth the effort. "Haven't had a meal like this since my sister left," he said, taking his seat. "It's nothing fancy," Clara demurred, but she was pleased. They ate quietly, the only sounds the clink of spoons and the settling of the house around them. When Wade pushed back his empty bowl, he looked at her across the table. "You settling in all right? The tech room comfortable enough?" "It's fine. Better than fine." She hesitated, then asked what had been on her mind all day. "What made you plant those flowers most men wouldn't bother?" Wade considered the question. "My sister Sarah. She was always trying to make things prettier. Said just because we lived in hard country didn't mean we had to live hard. When she left, I kept them going so she'd see I remembered when she visits." He smiled slightly. "Course, She hasn't been back yet. Been 2 years now. Do you miss her? Every day. But she's happy in California with her husband. Got 2 little ones now. That's what matters. He stood, started clearing dishes. I'll wash if you dry. They worked together at the basin, and Clara was struck by how natural it felt, like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. When the last dish was put away, Wade lit a lamp and pulled a book from the shelf. You're welcome to borrow any of these, he said. Reading helps pass the evenings. She ran her finger along the spines. Shakespeare, Dickens, some dime novels, a book on horse breeding, farmers' almanacs. You're an educated man. My mother was a school teacher before she married. She made sure Sarah and I could read and figure, said it was the one thing nobody could take away from you. Clara selected a worn copy of Jane Eyre and held it carefully. I haven't had a book to read in a long time. Keep it in your room long as you like. I've read it twice already. At her surprised look, he shrugged. Winter nights get long out here. Back in the tack room, Clara barred the door and lit her lantern. She changed into the nightgown Wade's sister had left behind. He'd brought it while she was cooking. Left it folded on the cot without comment. It was too short and too wide, but it was clean and smelled of lavender sachets. She tried to read, but her mind kept wandering to the day's events. Not the big things, but the small ones, the way Wade had handed her tools without making her ask. How he'd accepted her knowledge about the garden without question. The comfortable silence as they worked side by side. She'd known men who talked constantly about their plans and dreams and importance. Tom had been one of them, always scheming about the big herd they'd have someday, the grand house he'd build her, the respect he'd command. But he'd died broke and bitter, leaving her with debts and half-finished projects. Samuel Wade didn't talk about what he'd do. He just did it, fixed fence, tended horses, kept his sister's flowers alive because he'd said he would. He'd walked through that crowd today not because he had something to prove, but because it needed doing. Through the thin walls, she could hear him moving around in the barn, probably checking on a mare close to foaling. The sounds were soothing footsteps, the low murmur of his voice talking to the horses, the creak of stall doors. Normal sounds of a working ranch, a peaceful life. She knew it couldn't last. Crowley wouldn't let the insult stand. He'd come, bringing trouble with him. But for tonight, she was safe, fed, sheltered, treated with dignity, and tired bone deep tired from honest work. Clara blew out the lantern and lay back on the narrow cot. Through the small window, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere an owl hooted, and the horses shifted in their stalls. Tomorrow there would be more work the garden to tend, horses to care for, meals to cook, simple things. But they felt like building blocks, a foundation for something she couldn't quite name yet. Not her old life that was gone, burned away like her barn, but maybe something new, something quieter but stronger, built on actions instead of words. Sleep came easier than it had in months, deep and dreamless. And if she felt safer knowing Samuel Wade was near, keeping his quiet watch over his small kingdom. She didn't examine that feeling too closely. Some things, like trust, grew better in silence than in speech. The moon rose over the cottonwoods. The horses dozed in their stalls, and 2 damaged people rested under the same stars, beginning to heal in the quiet way of the land itself, slow, steady, and sure. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm of work and quiet companionship. Clara had fallen into the pattern of ranch life like a hand into a well-worn glove. She rose with the rooster, made coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, and had breakfast ready by the time Samuel came in from checking the stock. They worked through the heat of the day, ate supper as the sun set, and spent evenings reading by lamplight. It was after one such supper, as Clara mended a tear in Samuel's work shirt, that the walls she'd built around her past began to crack. You're handy with a needle, Samuel observed from his chair, where he was oiling a bridle. My mother insisted a woman should know how to make do and mend. She kept her eyes on the fabric. Said store-bought was for rich folks and fools. Sounds like a practical woman? She was. Clara's hands stilled. She died when I was 15. Consumption. I had to raise my younger brothers after that. Samuel continued working the oil into the leather, his movement steady and patient. He didn't push, just left space for her to fill if she chose. That's how I met Tom, she continued, surprising herself. My husband, he came to work the harvest on our farm. Seemed so charming then, so full of grand plans. Said he'd take me away from all that hard work, give me a better life out west. Did he? Clara's laugh was bitter. He tried, I suppose, but trying and doing are different things. Tom was good at starting projects, not so good at finishing them. Good at making promises, too. She resumed her sewing with sharp, precise stitches. He'd promised to fix the roof, then spend the day in town. Promised to bring in the harvest, then disappear when the work got hard. Promised to stop drinking, then come home reeking of whiskey. The words poured out like water through a broken dam. She told him about the early days when she'd believed things would get better, about learning to do everything herself, about the crushing loneliness of being married to a man who was more ghost than husband. The ranch was my idea, she said. I saved every penny I could hide from Tom, did washing and mending for other families. When old Mr. Henderson decided to sell, I had just enough for the down payment. Tom was furious when he found out, said I'd made him look weak, buying property without his say-so. But he came around. He liked being able to call himself a rancher, liked the respect it brought in town, but he never worked it. Not really. I did that, me and a few hired hands when I could afford them. Her needle flashed in the lamplight. When he died, I thought maybe I could finally make something of the place. Foolish, I know. A woman alone don't last long out here. You lasted 2 years, Samuel pointed out. That's more than most men could manage against Crowley. She looked up then, meeting his eyes. Why did you really help me that day? The truth now. Samuel set down the bridle. Considering, my father was a hard man in many ways, but he had his own code. He used to say that the measure of a civilization wasn't its churches or schools or laws, but how it treated those who couldn't defend themselves. Women, children, folks down on their luck. He paused. I saw you there, tied up like an animal, and all I could think was what my father would say if I rode by, what my mother would think, what I'd think of myself. That's all. No. His voice was quiet but firm. I'd seen you before, in town, at the Mercantile. Watched how you carried yourself, even when folks whispered behind your back. Saw you help the Mexican families when nobody else would trade with them. You never acted beaten, even when you had every right to be. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. You noticed all that? I notice most things. It's what comes of being quiet folks forget you're there. Show you who they really are. He picked up the bridle again. You showed grace under pressure, strength without meanness. Seemed wrong to let Crowley break that. They sat in silence for a while. The only sounds the whisper of thread through fabric and the soft scrape of leather on leather. Finally, Clara spoke again. I haven't told you the worst part, about why Crowley wanted my land so bad. Samuel waited. There's water on it, not just the creek that runs dry half the year, but a spring. It comes up from deep underground, never fails even in drought. Tom found it by accident. Chasing a wounded deer. We kept it quiet. Water rights are worth killing for out here. Crowley knows. His men found it somehow. Maybe followed me when I went to fill barrels during the dry spell last summer. She tied off the thread, bit it clean. He offered to buy me out fair at first. When I said no, the offers got lower and the threats got worse. Then came the accusations about the cattle, which were lies. Course they were, but who's going to believe a widow over Jasper Crowley? He owns the judge, the sheriff, half the town council. She folded the mended shirt carefully. I knew I'd lose eventually, just couldn't bring myself to give in. Tom might have been worthless, but that land was bought with my sweat and dreams. Giving it to Crowley felt like spitting on my own grave. Samuel stood, moved to the stove to pour coffee. When he handed her a cup, their fingers brushed briefly. The land's still yours, legal-like. Crowley hasn't filed any papers yet, far as I know. Doesn't matter. I can't go back. Can't work it. He's won. Maybe. Samuel returned to his chair. Maybe not. The other small ranchers are getting tired of Crowley's ways. Ben Martinez lost his place last month, same story, different details. The Watson brothers are next. Mark my words, folks are starting to mutter about organizing. Against Crowley, that's suicide. Is it? He's got maybe 20 men who'll fight for wages. There's near 50 small operations in this valley. We band together. He can't bulldoze us all. He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Course, finding someone to lead that band is another matter. Most of us are better with cattle than words. Clara studied him over her cup. You could do it. People respect you. I'm considering it. He met her gaze steadily. Would mean putting you in more danger. Though, Crowley already wants my hide. If I start organizing resistance, this place becomes a target. It's your decision, Clara said. I've got no right to influence it either way. I'm just grateful for what you've already done. You've got every right, Samuel corrected. You live here now. Work this place alongside me. That makes your opinion matter. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with more meaning than their simple surface suggested. Clara felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of bands she hadn't realized were there. Then I say do it, she said firmly. Crowley's like a cancer. Leave him be, and he'll eat up this whole valley. Someone needs to stand up to him proper, and you've already shown you're willing. Samuel nodded slowly. I'll ride out tomorrow. Talk to some folks. Feel them out. He paused. Will you be all right here alone? I've been alone before. Besides, I've got the horses for company, and that scattergun you showed me how to load. Just stay close to the buildings. Any riders come by you don't recognize. You bar yourself in the barn and wait for me. It was the most words she'd heard him speak at once, and the concern in his voice warmed her more than the coffee. She'd been taking care of herself so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone worry about her well-being. Later, alone in her room, Clara sat on the cot and let herself really think about the past 3 weeks. She'd grieved Tom when he died, but now she wondered if she'd been grieving the man he was or the man she'd hoped he'd become. Living here with Samuel, seeing how a man could be steady and reliable and kind without making a fuss about it, had shown her things about her marriage she'd been afraid to acknowledge. She'd settled for Tom because she was tired and scared, and he'd seemed like escape. She'd stayed with him because leaving would have meant admitting failure, and when he died, she'd clung to that land not out of love, but out of pure stubborn pride, the need to prove that she could succeed where he'd failed. But Samuel had shown her something different, partnership without ownership, respect without condescension, protection without imprisonment. He'd given her work that mattered, space to be herself, dignity in small daily things. Through the window, she could see light still burning in the house. He'd be planning now, that careful way he had, thinking through who to approach first, how to build a coalition against Crowley. She'd seen him work through problems with the same patient persistence he used training horses, steady pressure, consistent direction, never forcing but never yielding. Clara blew out her lantern and lay back, pulling the quilt to her chin. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Crowley wouldn't stay quiet forever, but tonight she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, not just safety, but possibility. The chance that life might hold more than mere survival. The sound of Samuel's footsteps crossing the yard to check the horses one last time was oddly comforting. She was building something here, she realized. Not just earning her keep or hiding from trouble, but creating a new life from the ashes of the old. And if that life included a quiet rancher who noticed everything and judged nothing, who offered partnership instead of charity, well, Stranger things had happened in this hard land. Sleep came easily, and if her dreams featured steady hands and winter sky eyes, she didn't question it. Some truths, like some feelings, grew better in the quiet dark, tended with patience until they were strong enough to face the light. The trouble came on a Tuesday morning, announced by a dust cloud on the horizon that grew larger as Clara watched from the garden. She'd been staking tomato plants, humming under her breath, when the movement caught her eye. 3 riders, moving fast and purposeful toward the ranch. She recognized the lead rider's black stallion before she could make out faces. Crowley. Clara's hands tightened on the hoe, but she forced herself to move calmly toward the house where the shotgun waited. Samuel had ridden out early to meet with the Martinez family. Wouldn't be back until afternoon. She was alone. By the time she reached the porch, the riders were close enough to identify. Crowley led, flanked by 2 of his men, Duke Morrison, a gun hand with dead eyes, and Pete Garrett, who'd helped burn her barn. They reined up just outside the yard fence, making no move to dismount. "Well, well," Crowley said, his voice carrying that false friendliness that made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Jennings, looking right at home. I see." Clara kept the shotgun visible but not raised. "State your business." "Crowley." "Now, is that any way to greet neighbors?" He leaned forward in his saddle, eyes scanning the property. "Where's Wade not like him to leave a lady unprotected?" "He'll be back soon enough." "I'm sure he will." Crowley's smile was cold. "Though I wonder if he knows exactly what kind of woman he's harboring. The kind who steals cattle, runs up debts, offers favors to men for protection." Heat rushed to Clara's face, but she kept her voice steady. "Say what you came to say and leave." "Fair enough." He pulled a paper from his coat. "I've got a legal notice here. Seems Judge Morrison has reviewed your case and found additional charges: theft of property, failure to pay debts, moral turpitude. You're to present yourself to the sheriff within 3 days, or a warrant will be issued. Those are lies, and you know it." "The law says different. Course. There might be another solution." His eyes glittered. "Sign over that worthless piece of dirt you call a ranch, and all charges disappear. You can stay here with Wade, cooking his meals, warming his bed." The shotgun was in Clara's hands before she realized she'd moved. "Get off this property, now!" Morrison's hand drifted toward his pistol, but Crowley held up a hand. "No need for unpleasantness. We're leaving, but you think about my offer. Mrs. Jennings, 3 days. After that, things get complicated. For you and for Wade." They wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving Clara standing on the porch with shaking hands and rage burning in her chest. She stayed there until the dust settled, then went inside and barred the door. Samuel found her sitting at the kitchen table when he returned, the untouched shotgun beside her and the legal notice spread before her. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening with each line. "Pack of lies," he said finally. Doesn't matter. Morrison will rule however Crowley tells him to. If I don't show up, they'll come for me. If I do, they'll jail me or worse." She looked up at him. "I'm bringing trouble to your door. Maybe I should—" "Stop." His voice was firm. "You're not going anywhere unless you want to. We'll figure this out." "How Crowley owns the law in this town." Samuel sat across from her, thinking. "The circuit judge comes through next month. Judge Carter from Denver. He's got no love for Crowley, ruled against him in a water rights case last year. If we can delay things until then. Crowley won't wait. You heard what he said. 3 days. Then we make those 3 days count." Samuel stood. Decision made. "I'm riding to town. Ben Martinez and his brothers are meeting some others at the saloon. Men who've had enough of Crowley's ways. Time to see if their talk amounts to anything. It's dangerous. If Crowley finds out, he already knows I'm against him. Might as well make it official." He checked his pistol, settled it back in the holster. Bar the door behind me. Anyone but me comes calling. You fire that shotgun first and ask questions later." After he left, Clara tried to go about her normal chores, but her hands shook and her mind raced. The peace she'd found here was fracturing, and it was her fault. She should leave, disappear in the night, let Samuel get back to his quiet life. But when she imagined leaving, never seeing him again, never working beside him in comfortable silence, never watching his rare smiles over the supper table, something in her chest twisted painfully. Somewhere in these weeks of simple daily living, Samuel Wade had become necessary to her in a way Tom had never been. The sun was setting when hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Clara grabbed the shotgun, then relaxed as she recognized Samuel's sorrel mare. But as he dismounted, she saw the grim set of his face. "What happened?" He came inside, accepted the coffee she poured. "Good news and bad. 15 men are willing to stand together more than I expected. Ben's brothers, the Watsons, old Murphy, even Charlie Simmons from the bank. Crowley's pushed too hard, too long. They're ready to push back." And the bad news, Crowley was in town too. Must have gotten word about the meeting. He made sure everyone knew about the charges against you, painted you as a loose woman who's bewitched me. Samuel's hands tightened on the cup. Said any man who stands with me is standing with immorality and lawlessness. Clara sank into her chair. "I've ruined everything. Your reputation, the coalition." "No." Samuel reached across the table, covered her hand with his. It was the first time he'd touched her deliberately since that day in town. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. "Some men backed out, true, but the ones who matter stayed. They know Crowley's game." "What do we do?" "We give him something he doesn't expect. Tomorrow, you and I ride to town together. Not skulking, not hiding. We face those lies head on." "Samuel, I can't. The warrant." "Won't be valid for 2 more days. And I've got a plan." His thumb moved across her knuckles, gentle but purposeful. "Trust me." She turned her hand palm up, laced her fingers through his. "Yes." They sat like that as darkness fell, hands linked across the rough wood table. Finally, Samuel spoke again, quieter now. "I need to tell you something. These weeks, having you here, it's been like the place came alive again. Not just the garden and the house being kept proper, but life, real life, laughter at supper, someone to share the work. Someone who sees the same things I do in a sunrise or a good horse." "Samuel, let me finish. I'm not good with words. But I need to say this. I didn't cut you free that day out of charity or even pure righteousness. I did it because when I saw you standing there, proud even in humiliation, refusing to break, I recognized something. Like calling to maybe... Or maybe I just saw a woman worth fighting for." Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I'm trouble, damaged goods. Like Crowley says, you could have any woman." "Don't want any woman. Want the one who works beside me without complaining, who saves dying gardens and makes a house feel like home. Want the one who stands up to men like Crowley even when she's got every reason to run." He squeezed her hand gently. "If that's trouble, I'll take it." The words hung between them, plain and true as everything else about Samuel Wade. Clara felt the last walls around her heart crumble like sun-dried adobe in rain. "The other night," she said softly, "I was thinking about the difference between you and Tom. He talked pretty, made grand promises, said all the right words, but you just do no fuss, no speeches, just steady and sure and there." She met his eyes. "I'd given up on finding something real, then you walked through that crowd." Samuel stood, drew her to her feet, still holding her hand. In the lamplight, his face was serious but warm. "Whatever comes tomorrow, we face it together." "Agreed." "Agreed." He walked her to the barn, waited while she barred the door. Through the window, she watched him cross back to the house, moving with that steady purpose she'd come to rely on. Tomorrow would bring challenges, Crowley's anger, the town's judgment, uncertain justice. But tonight, she had something she'd never had with Tom, rarely had in her life at all. Partnership, trust, the beginning of something that didn't need fancy words because it was built on a foundation of shared work and mutual respect. Something real. Clara prepared for bed with a lighter heart than she'd carried in years. Outside, a coyote called to its mate across the darkness. The night wind whispered through the cottonwoods. And somewhere in the house, Samuel Wade sat planning tomorrow's strategy, preparing to face down a town's prejudice for a woman he'd chosen to stand beside. She'd brought trouble to his door. True enough, but he'd opened that door wide and invited her in anyway. And that, Clara thought as sleep finally took her, made all the difference in the world. The night came sudden and violent, announced by the thunder of hooves and the flicker of torches through the windows. Clara jerked awake, heart hammering, as men's voices shouted in the yard. She'd been expecting this, lying wakeful despite her exhaustion, the shotgun loaded and ready beside her cot. Wade, Samuel Wade, come out and face justice. Crowley's voice, thick with liquor and rage. Clara peered through a crack in the barn wall. At least a dozen riders, maybe more, their torches casting dancing shadows across the yard. Samuel's house stood dark and quiet. We know the woman's here. Wade, send her out, and we'll leave peaceful like. Clara saw movement at the house window, Samuel. Watching, calculating. They'd planned for this possibility. Talked through what to do if Crowley came in force. But planning and facing down a lynch mob were different things. You've got 1 minute, Wade. Then we come in after her. Clara's hands were steady as she checked the shotgun. Though her mouth was dry as dust, she wouldn't let them take her. Wouldn't let Samuel face this alone. She'd started to ease the barn door open when she heard the sound of horses approaching from the east. Many horses. The mob heard it too. Men turned in their saddles, peering into the darkness beyond the torchlight. Then riders emerged from the night. Ben Martinez and his brothers, the Watsons, Charlie Simmons, and others. 15 men, maybe 20, spreading out to surround Crowley's bunch. Evening, Jasper, Ben Martinez said calmly, his rifle resting across his saddle horn. Bit late for a social call, isn't it? This ain't your business. Martinez, Crowley snarled. We're here on legal matters. Funny thing about legal matters. Charlie Simmons spoke up. They usually happen in daylight, at the courthouse, not with torches and ropes at midnight. Now Samuel emerged from the house, moving unhurried onto the porch. His rifle was in his hands but pointed down. Appreciate you men coming, he said to the newcomers. Though I could have handled this myself. No doubt, Ben replied. But we figured it was time to make something clear to Mr. Crowley here. The days of riding roughshod over folks in this valley are done. Crowley's face was ugly in the torchlight. You're making a mistake. All of you, standing with a cattle thief and her... Choose your next words, careful like. Crowley. Samuel's voice was soft but carried clear. You're on my land, threatening people under my protection. The law gives me the right to defend my property. Your property, Crowley laughed harsh. Is that what she is now, your property? Clara had heard enough. She stepped out of the barn, shotgun in hand but not raised. Every eye turned to her as she walked across the yard to stand beside Samuel on the porch. I'm nobody's property, she said, voice carrying strong despite her fear. Not my dead husband's, not yours, and not Samuel Wade's. I'm a free woman who's done nothing wrong except refuse to be bullied off my land. You were convicted, Crowley started, by a judge you own, for crimes your men committed. Clara stepped forward. You want to talk about theft? Crowley, let's talk about the water rights you've stolen, the families you've driven out, the land you've taken through lies and intimidation. Careful, woman. You're already facing charges. Don't add slander to the list. Truth isn't slander, old Murphy called out. We all know what you've been doing. Crowley, difference is, now we're standing together against it. The moment stretched taut. Crowley's men shifting nervous in their saddles. They'd come expecting to terrorize one woman and maybe face one man. 20 armed ranchers were a different proposition entirely. This isn't over, Crowley finally said. The law? The circuit judge will be here in 2 weeks. Charlie Simmons interrupted. Judge Carter, who's got no love for you after that water rights case, we'll let him sort out what's legal and what's not. Until then, Mrs. Jennings stays where she chooses. And if she chooses to stay here, Samuel added, then here she stays. Any man who thinks different is welcome to discuss it with me, personal-like. Duke Morrison's hand twitched toward his gun, but Crowley grabbed his arm. He was many things, but not stupid. The odds had shifted too far against him. You've chosen your side, he told the gathered men. Remember that when the consequences come calling. He wheeled his horse, his men following. This isn't finished. They rode off in a cloud of dust and defeated fury. The coalition of ranchers stayed put until the torchlight faded in the distance, then began to disperse. Ben Martinez lingered, tipping his hat to Clara. Ma'am, glad to see you're well. My Maria's been asking after you, said to tell you you're welcome at our place any time. Thank her for me, Clara managed, throat tight with emotion. After they'd gone, Clara and Samuel stood alone on the porch. The night sound slowly returned crickets, an owl, the familiar creak of the windmill. Samuel set his rifle aside, turned to face her. You didn't have to come out. Could have stayed safe in the barn. And let you face them alone after everything. She shook her head. I'm done hiding. Samuel, done running. If standing beside you brings consequences, so be it. He studied her face in the dim light from the house. You know what people will say, what they're already saying. A woman living here, working alongside me. They'll assume things. Let them assume. Clara set down the shotgun, suddenly exhausted. I've spent my whole life worried about respectability, about what people think. It didn't protect me from Crowley, didn't keep my husband faithful, didn't save my ranch. Maybe it's time I stopped caring about their opinions and started caring about what's true. And what's true? She met his eyes steadily. That you're the best man I've known. That these weeks here have been more of a real life than I had in years of marriage. That I'd rather face Crowley's whole army beside you than be safe and respectable anywhere else. Samuel moved closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. His palms were warm, gentle, trembling slightly. Clara, I know we haven't known each other long, she continued, needing to say it all. I know I bring trouble and complications. But Samuel, when you touch my hand, when we work side by side, when we sit quiet in the evening, it feels like coming home, like what I was always looking for but never found. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. Clara had been kissed before Tom's whiskey-flavored demands, the forced attentions of men who thought a widow was fair game. This was different. This was question and answer, promise and acceptance, gentle as morning rain on drought-struck earth. When they parted, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said simply. Not in the barn, not as a hand. Stay as whatever you want to be, whatever you'll have with me. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. They went inside together, Clara fetching her few belongings from the barn while Samuel built up the fire. She'd wondered if it would feel strange, crossing this last boundary. But it felt natural as breathing. She belonged here, belonged with this man who'd stood for her when no one else would. They sat by the fire, not touching, just being together in the quiet house. Tomorrow would bring new challenges Crowley wouldn't give up easily, and the legal battle still loomed. But tonight they'd won a victory not just over Crowley's mob, but over fear itself. I should tell you, Samuel said eventually. The men didn't just come because I asked. They came because they believe in what we're building. A valley where folks help each other. Where might doesn't make right, where a person is judged by their actions, not their circumstances. We're building that. Started the day I cut you free. Every time we stand up to Crowley, others find their courage. Ben told me 3 more families want to join the coalition. Charlie's talking about running for sheriff next election. He smiled slightly. Seems you've started something bigger than either of us intended. Clara leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. I just wanted to keep my land. And I just wanted to do what was right. Funny how small choices can grow into something more. His arm came around her, holding her close. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But inside was warmth and light and the beginning of something neither had dared hope for. Not a fairy tale romance, but something better, a partnership forged in trial, strengthened by shared purpose, and sealed with the simple promise of standing together against whatever storms might come. Clara closed her eyes, listening to Samuel's steady breathing and the settling of the house around them. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly safe. Not because the danger was past, it wasn't, but because she'd found something worth fighting for, someone worth standing beside. And that, she thought as sleep began to take her, made her richer than all the land and cattle in the valley. She'd lost her ranch but found her place, lost her old life but gained a new one. And if the price of that was facing down Jasper Crowley and his mob, she'd pay it gladly, every single day. The fire burned low, casting gentle shadows. 2 people who'd been broken by life in different ways sat together, whole at last. And somewhere in the darkness, Crowley nursed his rage and plotted revenge, not knowing he'd already lost the only battle that truly mattered, the battle for the hearts and courage of the valley's people. The circuit judge arrived on a Thursday, his black carriage raising dust clouds visible from the ranch. Clara watched from the garden, her hands steady on the hoe despite the churning in her stomach. 2 weeks had passed since the night confrontation, 2 weeks of waiting and working and building something new with Samuel. Judge Carter's got a reputation for fairness, Samuel said, coming up beside her. He'll see through Crowley's lies. Maybe. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. But Crowley's had time to prepare. God knows what evidence he's manufactured. The hearing was set for the next morning. That evening, their small house filled with neighbors, the Martinez family, the Watsons, Charlie Simmons, and others who'd stood with them. Maria Martinez had brought tamales. Other women brought pies and bread, turning what could have been a wake into something almost like a celebration. Whatever happens tomorrow, Ben Martinez said, raising his coffee cup. We've already won something. Look around this room. 6 months ago, we were all too scared to speak against Crowley. Now look at us. Old Murphy nodded. My Sarah can walk to town without those hands of Crowley's bothering her. That's worth something right there. As the evening wore on, people shared their stories. The Watsons talked about how Crowley's men had dammed the creek upstream from their property. Charlie Simmons revealed how Crowley had tried to force the bank to call in loans early. Each story was another stone in the wall of evidence against Jasper Crowley's reign of intimidation. You should tell the judge all this, Clara said. We aim to, Ben replied. Charlie's got a list of folks willing to testify. Crowley's not the only one who's been preparing. After they left, Clara and Samuel sat on the porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. She wore her best dress one of 2 Samuel's sister had left behind that Maria Martinez had altered to fit. Tomorrow she'd stand before the law again. But this time, she wouldn't stand alone. Nervous, Samuel asked. Terrified, she admitted. But not the same way as before. Then I had everything to lose and no one to help me. Now, she looked at him. Now I know that whatever happens, I won't face it alone. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. These past weeks, they'd built a quiet intimacy made of small touches and shared silences, of working side by side and talking by firelight. Not the passion of youth, but something deeper, the steady warmth of 2 people who'd chosen each other with eyes wide open. I've been thinking, Samuel said. About after, whatever the judge decides about the charges, there's still the matter of your ranch. The deed's in your name, the land's legally yours. We could fight to get it back. Clara considered this. The buildings are burned, the well's been poisoned, the fences cut. It would take everything to make it livable again. I've got some money saved, and with the coalition behind us. Samuel, she squeezed his hand. That land was my dream when I had nothing else. But dreams change. What we're building here, together, that matters more than any piece of paper. You sure? She thought of the garden flourishing under her care, the horses that now came to her whistle, the house that felt like home in a way her old place never had. I'm sure, though if we could get the water rights transferred, that spring could help a lot of families in dry years. Now that's thinking like a rancher's wife, Samuel said, then caught himself. That is, I know what you mean, Clara said softly. And when this is over, when we're not living under Crowley's shadow, ask me proper. I'll say yes. They sat in comfortable silence until the moon rose full and bright. Tomorrow would come with all its challenges, but tonight was theirs, peaceful and complete. The courthouse was packed when they arrived the next morning. It seemed every small rancher in the valley had come, along with townspeople curious to see how the drama would play out. Crowley sat at the prosecutor's table, dressed in his finest suit, looking confident despite the crowd being decidedly against him. Judge Carter was a thin man with sharp eyes behind wire spectacles. He studied the packed courtroom with interest before calling the proceedings to order. I've reviewed the charges against Mrs. Clara Jennings, he began. Cattle theft, failure to pay debts, and moral turpitude. Serious accusations, Mr. Crowley. As the primary complainant, please present your evidence. Crowley stood, smooth as oil. Your Honor, this woman has a history of defying law and proper behavior. She refused legitimate offers for her land, consorted with undesirable elements, and when faced with legal consequences, fled to live unmarried with Samuel Wade. Objection. Charlie Simmons stood up. The judge looked surprised. Mr. Simmons, are you representing Mrs. Jennings? I'm representing the truth, Your Honor. And the truth is that Mr. Crowley has systematically used false charges and intimidation to steal land throughout this valley. We have witnesses. Judge Carter's eyes sharpened. This is a hearing about Mrs. Jennings, not Mr. Crowley. With respect, Your Honor, they're the same thing. The charges against Mrs. Jennings are part of a pattern of abuse of the legal system. We can prove it. The judge considered. I'll allow it, but keep it relevant. Mr. Simmons. What followed was 2 hours of testimony that painted a picture of Crowley's empire of fear. The Watson brothers told of poisoned wells and cut fences. Ben Martinez described threats against his family. Sarah Murphy, old Murphy's daughter, testified in a trembling voice about Crowley's men cornering her, saying awful things, until other ranchers started protecting her. Through it all, Crowley's face grew darker, his lawyers objecting repeatedly. But Judge Carter allowed the testimony to continue, his expression growing grimmer with each revelation. Finally, Clara herself took the stand. She told her story, simply the loss of her husband, her struggle to keep the ranch, Crowley's escalating harassment when she wouldn't sell. The cattle found on my land were driven there by his men, she said clearly. I saw them do it, though I knew my word against his meant nothing to Judge Morrison. When I still wouldn't sell, I was subjected to public humiliation that no man would have faced for the same supposed crime. And now you live with Samuel Wade. Crowley's lawyer pressed, unmarried. Isn't that proof of the moral turpitude charges? Clara lifted her chin. I work for Mr. Wade as his housekeeper and ranch hand. I have my own quarters. What assumptions people make about that arrangement say more about them than about us. I'm not ashamed of honest work or honest friendship. Friendship. The lawyer sneered. Is that what you call it? Samuel stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, if questions are being asked about my household, perhaps I should answer them. Judge Carter nodded. Approach, Mr. Wade. Samuel came forward, steady as always. Mrs. Jennings works for me. Yes, she's the best hand. I've had better with horses than most men. Brought my sister's garden back to life. Keeps the book straighter than I ever could. If folks want to make more of it than that, it's because they've got dirty minds, not because we've done anything improper. And the night she fled to your ranch, the lawyer pressed. The night I cut her down from public humiliation. Samuel corrected. When no one else in that town had the courage to say it was wrong. Yes, I took her to my ranch. Would you have preferred I leave her in the street, or maybe tie her back up for your client's amusement? Mr. Wade. Judge Carter intervened, but his tone was mild. Please stick to facts, not editorial. The fact is, Samuel continued, Clara Jennings is an honest woman who's been targeted because she wouldn't bow to a bully. Everything else, the charges, the rumors, the threats are just tools to break her. Well, she didn't break, and neither will the rest of us. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of agreement. Judge Carter gavelled for order, then spent a long moment reviewing his notes. Mr. Crowley, he finally said, I find the evidence against Mrs. Jennings to be questionable at best. Moreover, the testimony I've heard today suggests a pattern of behavior that borders on criminal conspiracy. I'm dismissing all charges against Mrs. Jennings. The courtroom burst into cheers. Clara sagged with relief, Samuel's hand finding hers. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into land fraud in this county. Federal marshals will be arriving within the week. I suggest anyone with information about illegal land seizures make themselves available. Crowley shot to his feet. This is an outrage. You can't. I can, and I have. Judge Carter's voice was steel. Court dismissed. What happened next was chaos. Crowley lunged toward Clara, rage twisting his features. But Samuel stepped between them. Then Ben Martinez was there, and the Watson brothers. And suddenly Crowley was surrounded by men who'd had enough of his tyranny. It's over, Jasper, Charlie Simmons said quietly. Your reign is done. I suggest you leave town before those federal marshals arrive. Crowley looked around wildly, seeing no support, no fear in the faces around him. His empire, built on intimidation and corruption, was crumbling in a single morning. This isn't over, he snarled, but the words were empty now. He pushed through the crowd and left, Duke Morrison trailing behind him. Later, back at the ranch, their yard filled again with neighbors. This time it truly was a celebration. Maria Martinez hugged Clara tight, whispering, You did it, Mija. You stood up to him and won. We all did it, Clara corrected, together. As the sun set and the gathering wound down, Clara found herself by the garden. Looking at the thriving plants, Samuel joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. So, he said, it's over. The legal part. Anyway, there's still the federal investigation, getting land returned to rightful owners. I meant what you said in court, about working for me, having your own quarters. Clara smiled. Did you mind? No, you told the truth as it stands, but Clara... He turned to face her. I'd like to change that truth. If you're willing, make it so you're not my employee but my partner in everything. She thought of her first marriage rushed, based on desperation and false promises. This was different. This was choosing with full knowledge, building on a foundation of trust and shared work. Ask me proper, she said softly, like you promised. Samuel went to one knee right there in the garden dirt, taking her hand. Clara Jennings, you've brought life back to this place and to me. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Fair warning, I'm still not much for pretty words, and the ranch life is hard. But what I have is yours, and I promise to stand beside you, whatever comes. Yes, Clara said, tugging him to his feet. Yes, to all of it. He kissed her there among the thriving plants, with the last light of day painting the sky pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The windmill creaked its familiar rhythm, and two people who'd found each other in the crucible of injustice began planning a future built on something stronger than fear on courage, community, and the kind of love that grows slowly but surely, like a garden tended with patient hands. The morning sun cast long shadows across the yard as Clara and Samuel stood before the charred remains of the old freight wagon. It had sat behind the barn for months, a reminder of that terrible day in Dust Creek Square. Now, on this crisp autumn morning 3 months after their wedding, they'd decided it was time. You sure about this? Samuel asked, holding the can of kerosene. Clara nodded, her hand steady on the torch. It's time. Can't build a new life while holding on to symbols of the old pain. They'd married quietly, just a few weeks after the trial, with Ben Martinez and Charlie Simmons as witnesses. No fancy dress or grand ceremony, just simple vows exchanged in the small church, followed by a gathering at the ranch with all the families who'd become their true community. Now, as Clara touched the torch to the kerosene-soaked wood, she felt something release in her chest. The wagon caught quickly, dry timber crackling in the cool morning air. Smoke rose straight up in the still dawn, carrying away the last physical reminder of Jasper Crowley's cruelty. Look there, Samuel said softly, pointing toward the road. A small convoy of wagons was approaching the Watson brothers with their families. Returning to their ranch, the federal investigation had been thorough, and one by one, families who'd been driven off their land were coming home. Crowley himself had fled to California, his empire of intimidation crumbling once people realized he could no longer hurt them. "Morning! Sam misses. Wade!" Joe Watson called out, tipping his hat. "Fine day for a bonfire." "Just clearing out some old rubbish." Samuel replied, "You folks settling in all right?" "Better than all right. That spring on Clara's old place is flowing clear again. We've worked out a water-sharing agreement with the Martinez family, just like you suggested." Clara smiled. They'd decided not to reclaim her old ranch for themselves, instead proposing it be divided among families who needed the water access. The spring that Crowley had coveted now served 5 families, with legal agreements drawn up proper to prevent future disputes. As the Watsons rolled on, Clara and Samuel watched the wagon burn down to ash. The metal fittings would be salvaged, made into something useful, hinges for a gate, maybe, or shoes for the horses. Nothing wasted, everything transformed. "The garden needs tending," Clara said finally, turning away from the dying fire. They walked together to what had become Clara's pride, the expanded garden that now fed not just them, but provided surplus for neighbors in need. The marigolds and zinnias still bloomed among the vegetables, beauty mixed with practicality in a way that seemed to sum up their life together. As Clara knelt to check the squash vines, she heard horses approaching. Sheriff Thompson, newly elected to replace Crowley's puppet, rode up with a younger man she didn't recognize. "Morning, folks," Thompson called out. "This here's James Harper from the newspaper in Denver. He's writing about the changes in the valley. Wanted to talk to you both." Harper dismounted, pulling out a notebook. "Mrs. Wade, Mr. Wade, I've heard remarkable things about how this community stood together against corruption. Would you mind sharing your story?" Clara and Samuel exchanged glances. They'd avoided publicity, preferring to focus on building their life and helping their neighbors. But Samuel nodded slightly. Their story might help other communities facing similar troubles. "Come inside," Clara offered. "I'll make coffee." They talked for 2 hours, the reporter scribbling notes as Clara and Samuel took turns telling the tale, not dramatizing it, just laying out the plain facts of what had happened and how ordinary people had found courage in standing together. "What strikes me," Harper said finally, "is how it all started with one act of conscience. Mr. Wade, when you cut Mrs. Jennings, Mrs. Wade free that day. Did you know it would lead to all this? Samuel considered the question. No, sir, I didn't. Just knew it was wrong. What was happening? Sometimes that's all you need to know. After the reporter left, promising to send them a copy of the article, Clara and Samuel returned to their daily routine. There were horses to train, fences to mend, the last of the harvest to bring in. But now their work had a different quality. They weren't just surviving or even thriving, they were building something larger than themselves. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Clara noticed a rider approaching. For a moment, old fear flickered even with Crowley gone. The instinct remained. But as the rider drew closer, she recognized Maria Martinez's eldest son, Pedro. Senora Wade Don Pablo sent me with news. My sister Rosa, her baby came early. A girl, healthy and loud. Clara smiled, remembering the fear in Rosa's eyes during her pregnancy, how the young woman had worried about bringing a child into a world where men like Crowley held power. Give her my congratulations. Tell her I'll visit tomorrow with some of those baby blankets I've been knitting. After Pedro left, Samuel took Clara's hand. Remember what you said that night about how small things can grow into something bigger? I remember. Look what's grown from that day in the square. Not just our life together, but all of it. Free families on their own land, children being born into a community that protects them. Justice that means something. Clara squeezed his hand. My mother used to say that courage was contagious. I never understood what she meant until now. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear. Inside, supper waited simple fare, but made with vegetables from their garden and beef from cattle raised on honest grass. Tomorrow would bring its own work and challenges. The federal investigation continued. There were still wounds to heal, still injustices to address. But tonight, in this moment, Clara felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. She'd lost her first ranch but gained so much more: a true partner, a real community, a purpose beyond mere survival. The woman who'd stood tied to a wagon, refusing to break, had become someone she hardly recognized, stronger. Yes, but also softer in the ways that mattered. I love you, she said simply, words she'd learned to speak freely these past months. And I love you, Samuel replied, his arm coming around her shoulders. Every stubborn, courageous, garden-growing inch of you. The moon rose full over the cottonwoods, the same moon that had witnessed their first night here, scared and uncertain. Now it looked down on a couple who'd found their way through trials to something precious and unshakable. In the barn, horses settled for the night, the windmill creaked its endless rhythm, and somewhere in the ashes of the burned wagon, metal cooled and settled, ready to be reformed into tools for building rather than binding. Clara thought of all the women still trapped in their own public squares, tied by poverty or fear or cruel men. She and Samuel couldn't save them all, but they'd proven something important: that ordinary people, standing together, could face down tyranny. That quiet courage could speak louder than threats. That love could grow in the hardest ground if tended with patience and care. Come inside, Samuel said finally. It's getting cold. They rose together. Clara pausing to look back at their land, the thriving garden, the sturdy barn, the small house that held more warmth than many mansions. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. As they stepped inside, closing the door against the night chill, Clara felt the truth of what they'd built here. Not just a marriage or a ranch, but a beacon proof that justice could prevail, that communities could protect their own, that two broken people could create something whole and good. The fire in the hearth crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Samuel pulled out the book he'd been reading aloud in the evening's Dickens this time, a story about transformation and redemption. Clara settled beside him, her knitting in her lap, as his deep voice filled the room. Outside, the valley slept peaceful under the stars. The old freight wagon was nothing but ash and memory. And in a small ranch house, Two people who'd found freedom in each other continued building their quiet revolution, one day at a time, one choice at a time, proving that sometimes the greatest victories came not from grand gestures, but from simply refusing to let cruelty win. Their story would be told in the Denver paper, spreading to other communities facing similar struggles. But more importantly, it would be lived out daily in small acts of courage and kindness, in gardens tended and neighbors helped, in children born to freedom instead of fear. The West was still wild in many ways, still hard and unforgiving. But in this valley, on this night, justice had taken root as surely as Clara's vegetables, and like any good garden, it would spread, seed by seed, season by season, until even the memory of men like Jasper Crowley was nothing more than compost for better things to grow. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. We'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of courage and redemption. Please comment below and share where you're listening from so we can connect with fellow Western story lovers around the globe. Don't forget to subscribe to our From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier stories. And share your thoughts about Clara and Samuel's journey. What touched your heart the most? We read every comment and love hearing how these stories of the American frontier resonate with you.